I'm filing a couple of my nails while we're doing this because I'm trying to get some stuff done before I have to leave. And also, so everybody knows, I have to leave at about 2:15 to 2:30 today so that I can, you're already here, Tara, so that I can go to a doctor's appointment. So I will be leaving roughly around then. That's why I logged in before I was done with my nails so that I could do that and still get a couple of hours in today. Um, and we're just going to talk about some of the history of this situation and the colonialism and the manifest destiny that is going on in Palenstine right now. And, you know, what this means and how we can maybe find ways that maybe not so much, like colonization happening. Um, Mainly because I think that there are a lot of people that don't know. I mean, like most people, I myself had to find out a lot of information later in life, right? We're all learning. We're all learning all the time. That's important aspect of humanity is that we're all learning and we're all growing at all times, right? And because we are all learning and we are all growing at all times, it's important that we understand things. Hi, Mia. It is subscriber only comments today, only because of the fact that this is a hot topic, a topic that could cause problems. And I, my responses might not always be the best, and I do not want my not best responses um, to comments that are made in not best intentions to cause issue. And so I'm going to keep it as subscriber only comments today. I am on YouTube as well. Oh, did it not show up? No, it left. So let me go ahead and place that sticker above so that you guys know how to find me otherwise. And you can go over to that and comment if you would like to comment, but can't comment here and don't want to subscribe. I'm totally okay with that. I only have the subscribers because it's the ability, and sometimes we utilize that as our ability to actually function and to kind of like I can turn on subscribers only and read back through comments again. If you want to comment, and like I said, I'm not really big on people subscribing. You don't need to pay me money, but if you would like to comment and you can't on here because the subscriber only comments are on, you can go over to YouTube and comment. It's just another step, and that other step keeps it less trolly, right? Yeah, we all, I think, have a lot of big questions about this. And so I wanted to go ahead and kind of discuss some of the history going on and some of, what's going on in that area, because I think that that is an important thought process. Of course, I want to remind people as we do this that the state of Israel is not the Judaic people. There should be no hate going out to Judaic people. Judaic people are a marginalized group who has been attacked and a part of, um, a part of the horrors and the atrocities that have been committed across the globe, right? No, but just like the United States government is not the American people, right? Just like I can live in America and be an American and not hold faith with what the United States government does. Israel itself is the state, it's the government, it's not the people. And that's the distinction that's very important, right? Distinction that is very important is that an Israeli person living under the Israeli government is not the government, like they're not causing the government, right? And just like those of us living underneath the United States government. Now, sometimes, yes, absolutely. And there are some people living underneath the Israeli state government who absolutely participate. Yet it does not mean that the Judaic people are. And there's also the problem of the fact that there are Judaic people across the globe, right, who are not Israeli governmental people. Like they're not a part of the Israeli state, right? Their classification might be Israeli, right? Because they might come and descend from the Israeli people They are Judaic people in the United States is not about the state of Israel. Like it's a totally different thing. The state of Israel is doing is a completely different thing than the Judaic people themselves. So the original people of that area are the Canaanites. And in the Bible, it's documented how the Canaanites were conquered by the Israeli state, right? By the Israelites as they're moving across into their holy land that they believe is given to them by their God. And as they're moving into their holy land given to them by God, there are people already in that holy land. And so I want to talk a little bit about the differences and we've talked about this here and before. So I know that you'll know, and I know that some other people will know. But when we're looking at immigration versus migration versus colonization, what we're looking at is immigration is moving into, or let's start with migration. Yeah. Let's start with migration. Migration is moving into a space that is not occupied by other people, or it is moving into a space that you typically occupy during certain times of the year. So, like you might migrate through space as a person who belongs to, and we call these hunter gatherer versus collector tribes. So, please do not think of this as all people prior, because there are many people, there are many nations here in Turtle Island who are collector tribes versus and not hunter-gatherer tribes. Hunter-gatherer means that you're moving in a migratory pattern throughout the year to gather your things, whereas a collector means that you're staying in one space and you're going out to those different spaces over the course of the year. So there are groups of people who are migratory, and we call those groups of people hunter-gatherers. Now, when we're looking at this migratory pattern, you may be moving into space in your migration route where other people are already at, right? So, like, say you belong to two different, or you belong to a nation, and there's another nation, and you guys kind of utilize the same land over the course of your time as a nation, right? And in utilizing that same land over that course of that time, you might migrate into the same space over the course of the time, yet neither one of you is imposing your government on the other group of people. So there are instances, for me, because of my knowledge of history, I know more about Turtle Island Indigenous nations when it comes to prior to colonized contact than I do about other spaces. So it's easier for me to use that. So please understand that's why I'm using this specifically. There are, say, nations in the plains that had a migratory pattern throughout the year. And as they migrated throughout the year, they might have a winter camp and a summer camp and a fall camp and a spring camp, because the salmon might, well, maybe probably not the salmon, the fish might be running during the, if we're looking at the plains, probably not the salmon. The fish might be running during the spring, and the deer are, it's best to hunt deer in the fall because of life cycles for deer, right? And so you might go to where the deer are in the fall, or maybe another large game animal during the fall and hunt there, and then you might go to where the fish are during the spring, or just different places, the berries, things like that. So as you are doing this, you might move into an area where your winter camp is literally a 5-minute walk from somebody else's winter camp, right? You're not imposing your government over that other winter camp, right? You might be a member of, you might be a Lakota Nation member, and the other camp might be a Nakota Nation member, because these are two different nations, right? So you might be Lakota Nation, and the other camp nearby might be Nakota Nation, and you are not imposing your Lakota government on the Nakota Nation, right? And the Nakota Nation is not imposing their government on you. So we migrate as humans. Migratory patterns are something that have happened throughout our history as humans and throughout our prehistory as humans. Migration is moving into a space that is not occupied by other people. Again, if you're in two camps that are separate from each other, this camp is yours and that camp is theirs. And this is, migration as a pattern instead of migrating into a space. And it is not imposing your government over anybody else. Now, immigration is what comes next on my little list. Immigration is about moving into a space that already has people, but not imposing your government. So I might move into the United States as an immigrant from another country, and I'm not imposing my government or my ideas from that other country on the United States. I'm immigrating. I'm becoming a part of this country. I am learning the knowledge of this country. I'm trying to follow the government of this country, right? I'm immigrating. I'm moving into a space that is already occupied, already has a government, and I am not imposing my thought process on other people. Colonization is where you move into a space and you decide it's now your space, you impose your government on it. Most of the time, you are violent to the people who are already there. You're not moving in and taking part of, you're not living side by side. You have decided that this is now your space, and any presence of them must be eradicated. Any presence of them is not necessary. Any presence of them is not needed because of the fact that you have decided that it's your space. And if there are still other people there, well, then, maybe, just maybe, somebody might call you out for the atrocity of trying to kill other people, right? So, a lot of times, colonization is associated with genocide. The decision to remove an entire group of people, an entire civilization, or an entire nation, or entire culture, or an entire ethnicity, right? A lot of times we see that with colonization. Now, when we look at manifest destiny here in the United States, manifest destiny is a thought process that was put into place by the church that says that God gives people from Europe the right to this land. And it's put in place in this thought process that it's not being used in the way that God wants it to be used, or God made certain groups special and made other groups not special. Certain groups are God's chosen group. And so we see that manifest destiny comes into play here in the United States, and in Canada, and in part in Mexico as well, though I have to state that I don't know as much about the colonization of Mexico and South America as I do about the colonization of the United States and Canada. So, when we are looking at the way that manifest destiny plays out, we see that manifest destiny has actually been around a lot longer than most of us tend to think that manifest destiny has been around. And if you are somebody who has read your Bible, you'll know that. When we look at the Bible and the justification of manifest destiny, we see that the very, 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 very beginning of the Bible's um, step forward outside of Egypt, of the people of the Bible step forward outside of Egypt, is manifest destiny. You see that as God talks to Moses, and he is getting Moses to, as they're both kind of fucking with Pharaoh, they look at the God promises that there is this land that he is giving to the Israelites, and this promised land that he is giving to the Israelites, he once he can get them away from Pharaoh, though he doesn't really try too hard to get him away from Pharaoh, but once they finally escape Pharaoh, God goes through takes them through all of this space. First, they're wandering in the desert for 40 years. They're trying to find the promised land that God has given them. And as they're wandering, trying to find the promised land that God has given them, God finally gives them a promised land, finally names, this is it. This is what I've been telling you. You can have it now. This land is occupied. This land has members of an entire nation within this land. And it even states within the Bible that this land is occupied. Within the Bible, it is occupied by the people named the Canaanites. Now, the Canaanites are a group of people that occupy this region of the world at this time. And as those who occupy this region of the world at this time, the Canaanites they've built cities, they have built nations, and in their occupation of building those cities and those nations, they have created an entire civilization. It is this entire civilization that God tells the Israelites that they can overthrow. that this civilization has this land, but I've decided that this land is your land. So you can overthrow this civilization and get your land from this civilization. I'm going to go with this people. I want to harp down on the fact that this is a civilized nation by any measure of what we consider civilized, right? So, first of all, I want to state that I don't believe that civilization is very civilized. Most civilization is actually anti-civilized. Most civilization that we have named throughout the course of history as civilized is actually nations who are harmful to others and harmful to their own people. Most nations that we call civilized, we call them civilized because they have the ability to have enough grain to actually help their people, and yet they refuse to actually help their people. And for me, that means that they're not exactly civilized. Now, I don't know, what I don't know from the Canaanites' perspective what the Canaanites' world was like. Most of us don't know from the Canaanites' perspective what the Canaanites' world was like. I personally have not gone and studied that area extensively. And because I have only done slight study in that area, I do not know completely what the Canaanites' thought process was. What I do know is that they are documented as having, by those who conquered them, by those who came in and worked to destroy them, as having extensive cities and having an extensive political structure and having an extensive religious structure. Now, as they move through this land and destroy the cities in this land and destroy the people in this land, the people who are taking over this land are doing it in the name of their God. This is the original manifest destiny. Okay. This is the original. We have decided that our God has given us this land. It doesn't matter who's in this land, we're going to take it. Okay. And because this is the original manifest destiny, this is an early colonization based on God. And because this is an early colonization based on God and the original form of manifest destiny out there, it needs to be understood that the people that were being colonized at this timeline or during this timeline are the actual indigenous people of that area. Now, today, when you look at the DNA, you can see that the Lebanese, the Palestinians, and Judaic people have Canaanite blood. Now, we know from the Judaic people's own documentation that Canaanite blood within the Judaic people is not because they're indigenous to that space. It is instead because of the fact that they have moved in and colonized that space. And we all know what happens when colonization happens. There are a lot of people a lot of Europeans within the United States who have some great-great-grandmother who was indigenous to Turtle Island. This is what happens when we see colonization happen. When colonization happens, some of the people not some of the people, that makes it seem like it's a small amount. Many of the people within the space that is colonized end up being traumatized and end up being attacked. And so a lot of the genetics essayed. And so a lot of the genetics will come down through the lines into the people of that space or into the colonizers of that space because of the essay of the colonizers, like the colonizers committing, right? So the Judaic people in that space or around the globe, actually, I believe is what it is with the DNA, having Canaanite blood by the Judaic people's own text does not mean that they are Canaanite. It is about the fact that they colonized that area. And so the Canaanite DNA comes in through that colonization. One second on that one, Ami. It's a good question, but give me a minute on it. So when we are looking at that, we see that, first of all, the Palestinians do not have a country. There is no country that is Palestine anymore. in the end of the Civil or not the Civil War, in the end of World War II, um, the Allied nations start dividing up the states that they have conquered, the spaces that they have taken over, the spaces where they have overthrown dictators, or the spaces that they've acquired. One of those spaces that is acquired is Palestine. And we see that Britain had control of Palestine. Palestine at this time is a nation, and that, or not a nation, is a country, like is a land, and that Britain turns over the control of what happens to Palestine to the UN. The UN drafts an idea of how to divide the space between the the Israelites or the Judaic people that are across the globe so that they can go back to Jerusalem, and the current Palestinians living within that space. Um, when the when they do this, the Palestinians look at this and they say, you can't do it this way. If you do it this way, you're giving too much control to Israel, and the state of Israel will take over. They'll take over. That's what they want to do. If you do this, then the state of Israel will harm us, and you have balanced this in their favor too much. And so Palestine doesn't agree with the layout that is presented by the United Nations. And when Palestine doesn't agree with the layout that is presented by the United States nations, and yet the state of Israel agrees with the layout presented by the United Nations, the state of Israel decides to ignore the fact that the United Nations hasn't codified this, and the United Nations hasn't decided that this is actually what's going to happen. They have decided that this is what we're at, and we're still in negotiations. And since the state of Palestine refuses to give in, um, and is trying to ensure that they maintain their autonomy, and they are able to maintain their governmental control of their spaces, and that they're not losing more space than they should. While this is happening, the state of Israel moves in and decides to attack and conquer again. Now, mind you, this is the second time, right? Because according to the Bible, we even have in the book of Joshua where the general Joshua actually allots different portions of Canaan to different Israeli nations or different Israeli tribes. As we see this moving forward, we see that the state of Israel goes in and starts conquering this area. As they go in, they start conquering this area. They end up originally with the spaces roughly where United Nations had said that they thought that they should have, right? They've taken a little bit more, but not too much more. And a big part of this is because some of the areas that they want to take are controlled by larger governments, and they are like Egypt. They're also fighting against what they call the six Arab nations at the time, which are different Arabic groups within Palestine. They are groups that are indigenous to Palestine, Arab meaning that they are following the Islamic thought process at this time, right? So as we see Israel move in and start to conquer, they take these spaces initially in the late 40s, early 50s. Love you too. Yes, absolutely. And I'm sorry. I can answer this really quick. How do I feel about blood quantum and indigenous identity? If a colonizer happens to be 5%, do they get to claim that identity? So indigenous to Turtle Island, or indigenous to a space sometimes is different than belonging to a nation of a space. I want to double down on that. So you can't claim to be a member of the Cherokee Nation unless you are a member of the Cherokee Nation, right? Yet, if you have indigenous, and many people will tell you, if you are one drop indigenous, then you're indigenous, right? I do not hold truck with the idea that you can claim indigenous identity and use it against indigenous people, though. Indigenous identity is about the connection doesn't have to be to a nation. It's still connection to your past, to your history, to your ancestry, to the land, right? It is about not upholding colonization, right? So a colonizer who is currently partaking in colonization should not be claiming indigenous identity. Yet if somebody is 5% indigenous and they want to work for Indigenous uplift, and they are working for Indigenous people, and they're working for their own history, and they are working, they're learning their ancestry, and they're trying to live as an Indigenous human being with Indigenous behaviors and Indigenous thought processes, then absolutely they're Indigenous. Just for that question. Um, so when we're looking at the takeover of this space, what we're seeing is that in the takeover of this space, they get part of the land and part of what was, well, they get really all of what was allotted to them by the UN by the end of the 40s. They do this with the help of the United States, it should be known. And they have maintained this with the help of the United States. Not only have they maintained this, but they have been working this entire time at expanding this. So while they were able to take over certain spaces in the late 1940s, the government of Israel starts establishing a government. And when they start establishing that government and they have gotten into place and gotten the governmental structure in there and they're in this land, they start working to take other spaces. Once they have established themselves in a specific space, they start working to take other spaces around. So this is exactly why the Palestinians had told the United Nations, what you're doing is going to give them too much power and they're not going to stop there. So as the Palestinians have told the United Nations this, and as the United Nations said, yeah, whatever, we're just going to ignore the fact that they're coming in and stealing this land and trying to take all this space. And as the United States government is, of course, helping out the government of Israel to do this, we see that they start to take more and more space to the point they have taken really all of the space that belongs to Palestine at this point, except for two spaces. These two spaces are not even considered to be a country of Palestine at this point of time because of the fact that they are still occupied, or they are currently occupied by the Israeli government and have been. These two spaces are taken over by the Israeli government in the 1960s. 1967 is when they take Gaza and the West Bank. So Gaza is a strip of land that is encompassed on all sides. Two sides are encompassed by the state of Israel. One side is encompassed by Egypt, and one side is on the water. But there's one side is on the water. So I'm geographically challenged always completely. I had to look that up. So when we're looking at this space, what we're seeing is a space that is very narrow. It is not a whole lot of space. It has been an occupied space since the 1960s. It is described as being one large refugee camp at this point. So since the 1960s, the Palestinian people have basically been living along the West Bank or along the Gaza Strip in what is essentially a refugee camp, in land that has been theirs for thousands and thousands of years, fighting for an occupation that they have been fighting for thousands and thousands of years. So we're seeing that in this space, we have this land that is occupied not only by Palestinians, but the state of Israel has moved Judaic people within this space. It is a space where there was a corridor where people could escape to other countries that the state of Israel has blocked off. So they won't even allow people to escape from this space. It is a space where the ports have been blocked off so people can't escape over water. So within this space, we now have generations who have been living as refugees within the land that was their land for thousands of years before colonizers moved in. As we see this going on, what we're seeing is that there are a lot of, these are families being born and dying in this space. These are children being killed in this space. People who are trying to flee are being blocked from fleeing and harmed in their block from fleeing, right? Again, we're dealing with a government that is a colonizing government that has been a colonizing government since they first moved into and documented their move in, documented their violent move into this space 3,000 plus years ago. So when we're looking at the Palestinians within this space, we need to acknowledge that we're looking at an indigenous people within a space who have been fighting for 3,000 years at this point against colonization, who have been doing everything within their power for an extended period of time to maintain space and maintain their home. A big part of the problem here is the United States deciding that they're going to dictate who gets what, right? Because if the United States wasn't over there deciding, well, we're just going to take this land from Palestinians and give this land to the Israelites, then, or the state of Israel, then we wouldn't be in this problem to begin with, right? If we had different ways of handing over this land, maybe because Jerusalem is a holy site for really everybody who follows the Bible or any iteration like the Quran, or any iteration of the Bible, right? From the Torah to the Quran to the Bible. So when we are looking at this, if we had given Jerusalem as a free state, not governed by anybody or maybe governed by the UN, as a space of safety, right? As a safe space where people weren't allowed weapons. And, like Rome itself, there is the Vatican within the city of Rome, and Rome itself is its own state, right? So if you create something where you're not actually giving Jerusalem itself in control to any specific group of people, but giving the city itself in control, or not in control, but as a safe zone, a free space, right? So there are several different ways that those who decided to enforce this on other people could have gone about it, right? And yet, we all know how that goes. We all know how that goes. So when we are looking at this, again, we are looking at a space that was colonized violently and documented by their colonizers in a book that everybody has no knowledge of, right? And everybody has knowledge of this violent colonization being documented, right? Everybody has knowledge of how this happened, because even if you don't want to hear the Christian history, the Christians will tell you. So we all have knowledge of how this happens. We are looking at a space that we all have knowledge of the violent colonization of, and we decided to give it back to the colonizers and expected those who have violently colonized it in the first place to not violently colonize it again. The indigenous groups that are still within this space, and there are 4 named indigenous groups within this space, within both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, who are fighting to be recognized by the UN currently, who are currently asking for recognition by the UN as indigenous groups. The indigenous groups within this space are asking to be heard as indigenous groups within this space, are asking to no longer be losing that which is theirs, right? Are asking to no longer have their land stolen from them in this violent manner. And yet, we are currently still seeming to not understand what is going on in this space. Now, I know that within the United States, especially, we have this idea that anybody who is of Islamic or Arabic descent must be the issue and must be the problem. And therefore, we have a lot of anti-Islamic sentiment, which seems to be directed at the Palestinians quite a bit to me. It is one of the main reasons that we see that people are constantly saying that, we should be giving this space back to the Judaic people when it wasn't theirs to begin with. And it is one of those reasons where we see, or one of those things where we see this constant, prejudice, this constant prejudice going on, right? This constant hatred. When we are looking at this, it's important to understand just how most of us know, at least most people who follow me, and most of the people who are my friends in here know the trauma of fighting colonizers, the trauma of resilience, the trauma of trying to ensure your grandchildren's future, right? This is what we're dealing with. Is a people who have been fighting to ensure their grandchildren's future for over 100 generations, about 150 generations, who have been fighting against colonization to ensure the freedom of their children and grandchildren. To round the Palestinians up, again, the descendants of the Canaanites, and put them into two spaces within what is the state of Israel's control right now, is something that most of us here in the United States are actually pretty familiar with. Something that most of us here in the United States have seen. We call this the reservation system here within the United States. To take millions of people and fit them within a couple miles, which is what is going on in the Gaza Strip, in a space that does not have a lot of access to create food. Again, what we're seeing in the Gaza Strip, and to block their access to food, to block their access to safety, is again something that we have seen here within the United States and Canada, right? These are things that we, especially as a country, have some serious knowledge of and some serious recent knowledge of. Now, many of us within the United States and Canada have ignored it. Don't talk about it, couldn't care less, right? Because many people here within the United States and Canada buy into the colonized thought process and really need that colonized thought process to be a part of who they are. Because if they're not doubling down on that colonized thought process as part of who they are, then what atrocities have they committed, right? What have they done that might possibly be the problem, right? And so we absolutely can see where this is happening, and in our own country. So understanding how this is happening in other countries becomes doubly important in my thought process. And again, what we're looking at here is very much the original form of manifest destiny. My God says that this is my land now. And because my God says that this is my land now, I can kill you and take you from it. Right? I can kill you and it's mine. So as we're looking at this, I personally find it something that's very important to really hold on to and remember just exactly what is going on, especially because, I know a lot of people, especially I have family members, Indigenous family members who very much are like, supporting Israel and the state within this without realizing the colonization that is actually happening and the manifest destiny that is actually happening within this space. And so I find it very important that we have these conversations, that we understand this thought process. It's hard for many of us who have had an indoctrinated education or have not had an extensive education to understand and see what is actually going on. Mainly because of the fact that indoctrination has that effect, right? It kind of hides the reality of the world from us. It's part of the point of indoctrination, right? And so when we see that indoctrination is actually hiding the reality of the world from us, and we fail to see that, what we're dealing with is a lot of the same harms for a lot of the same reasons that a lot of us are dealing with, then we end up with 3,000 years of colonization that, nobody is helping to get rid of, right? That people are supporting, right? And that in and of itself for me is extremely problematic. So there's a little bit about the history, a little bit about the knowledge of it. And I'm probably missing some things. I'm going to go ahead and I'm only going to do this for a few minutes. And I am not going to answer any comments that are shitty. And I'm asking that nobody speak. This is not a space for anti-Semitism. The issue is the state of Israel. The issue is not the Judaic people. The Judaic people are a global people, and they are not the state of Israel. And that is something that needs to be reiterated as many times as I need to reiterate it, because I am not going to have you guys leave my live and go and attack and harm other people, right? That is not what this is about. The state of Israel is an issue. The Judaic people are a people who have gone through extensive traumas, and they do not deserve to have more traumas purported on them or dealt to them, right? Palestine and Palestinians are absolutely indigenous people. It is not the Judaic people who are harming the Palestinians. It is the state of Israel currently who are harming the Palestinians. So as I turn this on for comments, I want that to be understood. And I want it understood that I will only leave these on for a few minutes, just because of the fact that otherwise it will become kind of problematic for me. And I'm going to be very selective about what I answer and what I respond to. So I'm going to go ahead and leave them on for a couple of minutes. And mainly this is because of the fact that I want to make sure that I'm getting all the points. And sometimes it's hard for me to get all the points if I do not have input on the points, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and open it up so that I can ensure that some of the points that I might be missing are actually coming across. I think that for me, it's extremely important to acknowledge that as we're working and living within this current understanding of the world, that is such a global understanding, that current global understanding of the world be not just an understanding through our eyes and through our indoctrination, but an understanding of what might be going on for other people, what might be harming other people. I do not know how the US government is going to deal with its colonial past. It has a lot of answers that it needs to give, and it has a lot of action that it needs to take. I am not a part of the US government. I have ideas, right? I have ideas. That doesn't mean that I have any knowledge. I do believe that the United States needs to get the fuck out of any interaction with Israel and Palestine. I think that, or if the United States or any foreign government has the thought process of how they want to help, that they should be following what the Palestinians are asking, that they should go to the Palestinians and ask what it is that needs to be done, instead of deciding for the Palestinians what needs to be done to give them back their space. Palestinians are indigenous. The Palestinians are the Canaanites. They're the descendants of the Canaanites. They were the people who were in that land when Israel conquered that land, when Israel colonized that land, as documented in their own history books. And because they were the people who were in that land, when that land was colonized, they are the indigenous people of that land. There are also currently 4 groups asking the UN for recognition as indigenous people who actually follow all of the things, or actually are all of the things on what the UN considers to be indigenous. So the UN has a list of what you have to meet, right? No, I'm not. I'm going by DNA, Quintanamo. By DNA, the Palestinians are the Canaanites. Therefore, by DNA, the Palestinians are the indigenous people of that land. The Romans pushed the Jews out, right? And it is manifest destiny. It is manifest destiny. And I think that we need to recognize that. I don't think it's something that most of us recognize. I don't think it's something I recognize for the longest time. But it is absolutely manifest destiny. And it is absolutely manifest destiny in its first indoctrination, because it is the first time we see this God go, I've decided that this land belongs to you. And so it's okay for you to go and kill all the people of this land because I've decided it belongs to you, right? And since it is the first time we've seen this God go, well, you can kill all the people of this land because I've decided it belongs to you, that in and of itself is manifest destiny. Some of you are just going to be like blocked and muted. I'm just not dealing. They don't give a percentage amount of Canaanite for either Judaic people or Palestinian people. They do state that the Judaic people have Canaanite blood, though you also can read the Judaic people. You can also read the Israeli account of how the Israelis got that blood by colonization. That does not mean that they now have a right to that space over the people who have been fighting against that colonization for 3,000 years. I cannot remember the names of the four groups that are fighting for recognition. You can do a little bit of research, though. I mean, it was like high up there on the research thought process when I was doing my research on it. Or not thought process, but like high up there in the Google thought process, like the articles of who is indigenous to that area, the articles of who has blood in that area, the articles of all of those things. Thank you, some girl. Absolutely, everybody. So because of that, you can actually find really, and it's a couple of all somethings, and it's one of them starts with an R or a K, but I can't picture it perfectly in my mind, right? So within that, that gives, it's pretty easy to find, fortunately. So when we are looking at, and I agree with that. Delilah says, and that is why I don't think there'll ever be full resolution. The Palestinians are defending their home, and the Israelites are listening to their God-granted land. And that is true. Again, we're dealing with an original form of manifest destiny where there is this thought process that it is God granted, that God said you can have it. And because God said that you can have it, that means you can have it, whether or not there are already people there, whether or not it means that you're destroying other people, whether or not it means that you're killing children, doesn't matter. God said it was okay for you to do it. God said that it was okay for you to harm others. And because God said it was okay for you to harm others and take from others, then you're absolutely feeling that you have the right to harm others and take from others because God said. And, when God says it, then it makes it okay. It's not okay to harm people when God doesn't say it's okay to harm people, but it's okay to harm people when God says it's okay to harm people, right? Which is something that we all can see and recognize. And it's a huge problem that we are almost all of us having to deal with and understand. Of course, there are absolutely people in specific places who are not having to deal with it and understand it, but it is one that most of the people that I know have this knowledge of because they've had to deal with it. And so it's important with that. Again, it is also important, and I want to make sure that people understand that there is a huge difference between the Israeli government, the state of Israel, right, and the Judaic people across the globe, right? The Israeli government or the state of Israel is what is actively colonizing. The Judaic people across the globe are not. Many times they're immigrants or migrants, right? It wasn't the British. So again, at the end of World War II, this land is controlled by the British. And as this land is controlled by the British, they actually have a specific word for it that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it basically means that the land of Palestine is basically being controlled by another country because that other country doesn't believe that the land of Palestine has the ability to control themselves, right? The infantilization of another nation of people, right? So because Britain infantilized the Palestinian people and the Palestinian government, right? You see that Britain took control over the Palestinian area. And at the end of World War II, after infantilizing the Palestinian government and using that as a way to take control over the area of Palestine, the government of Great Britain asked the UN to step in and decide what area of Palestine should then be given to the Israeli government, to the state of Israel, so that the state of Israel could have a state. There is a lot of positivity in that. I mean, so what do we do? What do we do when we have a group of people who are, who have been harmed and marginalized and have just gone through a genocide and who are, trying to find some place to go to, right? And they want to go to where they believe God gave them, right? How do we deal with that? I do believe that there are a couple of different ways that we could have dealt with it that were probably healthier. I also know that, I'm not the be all and end all on that, so I probably don't know all of it. Chile, if it refused to post it, it's because there was something in it that my comments won't do. That's why it says the comment will be removed. And that's basically something in the original comment was a blocked keyword. The random redrawing of maps by colonialists always cause these problems that last until today, and that's real. Oh, okay, Chile. Awesome. Just wanted to make sure. So that for me is hard, Miss Red Rouge. Texas is labeling Hamas as a terror group that is globally anti-Semitic. Is that propaganda? So the original thought process, or so what I was finding when I was doing research on this, is that the Hamas group originally actually was about ending the state of Israel, not the Judaic people, right? So not being anti-Semitic, yet ending the state of Israel. And that was their original charter. To me, that makes sense. If someone has been trying to kill you for 3,000 years, and your children keep dying, most of us want that to go away, right? Most of us are going to go, yeah, I'm done with you. You can end now, right? Yet they changed the way that their charter or their doctrine of what they're doing states, because people took that as being anti-Semitic. Again, the state of Israel is not the Judaic people, right? The Judaic people are a completely different. The Judaic people are global, and they are not always associated with the state of Israel, right? So because of that, we see that they changed the way that they had it worded, and currently what it is the return of Palenstine to its original inhabitants with the removal of foreign government is what it is. And so that's what they are trying to do. With that, I would have to state with whichever one it is, it makes sense to me. Now, we're not talking about a group that is going across the globe and, hunting down different people, different members of a specific group across the globe and trying to harm them. That's not what's going on. We're looking at a group that has been, forced to live, has developed under, forced, and being forced to live in a specific state or space that has, again, like a couple of miles of a strip with 2 million people, right? Listen, there are people in the US who are routinely harming LGBTQ people. Is Hamas routinely executing LGBTQ people? Very likely. We're talking about an Arab nation, right? And there are extremists, religious extremists within every religion that do this, right? Does that mean that they are not also fighting for trying to ensure that their people are not being executed routinely by a foreign government? And should we not support them in their fight to stop their children from being executed by a foreign government? I do not have to agree with your politics. I don't have to agree with the things you're doing. I can still see where you have the right to autonomy and sovereignty. I can still see where other people are harming you, whether or not I agree with what you're doing. As a two-spirit, as an LGBTQ person, that's a horrific thing. Okay? What is happening to their children is also horrific. And it doesn't stop the horror that is happening to their children just because they are also committing a horror. Doesn't stop that. We should not have control over a foreign government. Who do you think you are that you think that your politics and your thought processes should be in control of the rest of the world. That's not right. Any more than executing people for their gender identity is, or executing children for their nationality is. None of it is right. Right? So I can know that something that is not right is happening and still know that that doesn't stop the is not right that is happening to them. Right? I'm not romanticizing anybody. Not romanticizing anybody. You're romanticizing somebody. And in your need to romanticize the state of Israel, you're ignoring the issues. What does the state of Israel do to LGBTQ people? Because the last I heard, Israel isn't too fond of them either. Have you decided that you're going to pick the state of Israel, who's also harming LGBTQ people because, well, they're, Israel? And you're not going to pick the Palestinians who are harming LGBTQ people because of the fact that they're Muslim? Is your religious thought processes entering into this? Is your issues entering into this? Because that's what I would think. Well, those are from different areas, and they are doing different things. ISIS and Al Qaeda are not indigenous to the groups that they are trying to colonize. So again, when we look at this area, this space, this land space, what we see is that the Palestinians and the Lebanese are the descendants of the Canaanites, not through conquering, but through direct descendants, right? The state of Israel has also been attacking the state of Lebanon, trying to take Lebanon as well. They are literally trying to take everything within that area, right? And that is the other thing. Hamas is a far-right religious group. I don't deal with religious extremists very well. There's something wrong with religious extremism. As religious extremists, Hamas has an issue. That's not okay. As a group who is trying to retain and regain their indigenous land, the space that was theirs prior to colonization by a foreign government that has documented their colonization that you've all read about, and did so in an extremely violent manner, and has maintained this colonization of this foreign government in this foreign space for 3,000 years, and is currently doing it still in an extremely violent manner. As a group who is fighting against that, Hamas has every right to fight against that, right? Have you read the Changed Hamas Covenant? And do you believe that overthrowing your oppressors is somehow wrong? There are numerous Islamic extremist groups currently active. Islam is a beautiful religion. Islamic extremists, not so much, right? Islam is a beautiful religion that I learned before I learned Christianity. Islamic extremists, not so much. And I have read both Hamas covenants, both the original one and the current one. And I'll tell you, my initial reaction when I read the original one was, after you've been traumatized for so long, everybody says enough. There's nobody, no group in this world who would not say that's enough. I'm done. I'm going to do what I can to take over and overthrow. If somebody in the ghetto during the German genocide of the Judaic people within Germany had formed, and they did, an anti-German, anti-Nazi group, and they did, with the plan to overthrow the government that is trying to harm them, and they did. And their plan was to get rid of all of the Nazis, and it was. Would you have a problem with them? Would you think that that was wrong? Right? And decades of occupation. Hamas is from the 90s, and it comes after this area is forcibly taken over in 1967 and turned into a refugee camp in its own homeland. So we have several generations of people who are living in a refugee camp in a space that is literally their indigenous homeland for thousands and thousands of years, and they are forced to be refugees within their own indigenous space. Generations of refugees who, when they try to leave that space, are unalived by their colonizers. Everything out, every pathway to leave has been blocked by their colonizers because the state of Israel is out to eradicate the Palestinians. The state of Israel does not just want the land, it wants to eradicate the Palestinians. And you're upset that somebody said, okay, fine, I'll eradicate you. Right? So we need to put aside our bias based on what we consider to be a positive faith versus a negative faith. And I'll be real. Just like it's as racist to decide that all Indigenous women are healthy and not look at the lived experience of Indigenous people, it is racist to decide that because of the harm done by Germany, it's okay to allow the Israeli government to harm other people. That's not, we can have things that seem like we're doing the right thing that are still just as fucking racist as the wrong thing and are doing just as much harm. It is very much like a prison. They are very much imprisoned. They are very much living with short shrift, right? Like not a whole lot of things that they're allowed to have, and they are not allowed out, right? So again, we have an Indigenous group that has been forced into a space that is their own space, that they've been in this space for thousands of years, but millions of them forced into a couple of square miles, right? Who have been forced to live in poverty within those couple of square miles, right? And are being attacked regularly. You need to understand that Israel has not stopped attacking Palestine. So even though the only spaces that have Palestinian people who are not under control of the Israeli government are the West Bank and Gaza Strip, even though that's the only two spaces not controlled by Israel within that, Israel is still attacking them. After forcing them into a space, right? After getting rid of all of their outlets, all of their ways out, all of their ways to get away, they're bombing them. They're attacking their children. They're killing them. They have rounded them up and placed them in a specific space to make it easier to attack them. And then they are systematically killing them, forcing them to live as refugees in their indigenous homeland and systematically killing them, right? Like corralling. Well, and I'm trying not to use the words that come to mind. I'll be real. I'm trying not to state. We have people living on reservations that the Judaic government has enforced, that they're refusing to allow these people to live. They're controlling their food and water, and they're killing them. This is the American government and what the American government has been doing or has done to Indigenous people, right? It is very much a concentration camp, right? It reminds me of Trevor Noah talks about how in South Africa during apartheid, they would keep black and colored groups of people because those are two distinctions within South Africa. Do not get on my case for saying the word colored because it is a distinction within South Africa. They would keep black people in one area and colored people in another area. They weren't allowed to intermix. And they would set it up to where they could bomb them. Like he talks about, I think it's Soweto that he talks about, where it was literally the way that the township of Soweto was set up was so that the government could come through and bomb whenever they wanted, right? This reminds me of Black Wall Street, where the government come in and just bombed it, right? This is the same thing. You're rounding all of these people up. You're putting all of these people in an extremely small space because it's easier to kill them if you can put them all in one space. And it's not that they want them to leave. It's not that they want their land. It's that they want them dead. It's that they want to eradicate this group of people. Because if they know that if they don't eradicate this group of people can then come back and claim it later because that's what they did, right? They left and they came back and claimed it later. So they have to eradicate this entire group of people so this group of people doesn't come back and try and claim it later. And now they're not just focused on these spaces, right? They're not just focused on the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. They have, since doing this, attacked Lebanon. They're trying to take Lebanon as well, because the state of Israel believes that God gave them that entire area and that the Canaanites should not have it. And they know that we are talking about the descendants of the Canaanites, the original occupiers of that land. God said that he didn't like the Canaanites, and so the Israelites should take that land from the Canaanites. God gave them permission to do it in an extremely violent way. God helped them do it in an extremely violent way. And since God said that that's their land, none of the descendants of the Canaanites should have it, right? So the state of Israel is not just attacking West Bank and Gaza. They have attacked Lebanon in the past as well to try and take the space from the Lebanese. And Lebanon, where the Palestinian people are descendants of the Canaanites, they have other blood within them currently. Lebanon is the direct descendants of the Canaanites. They are 100% Canaanite, and the state of Israel is trying to take their land as well, right? So what we are looking at is, again, an indigenous space fighting colonization after 3,000 years. And that fight against that colonization, against, again, and I want to reiterate this several times, manifest destiny, because that is exactly what this is. This is the original form of manifest destiny. God said this land was mine. And because God said this land was mine, I can take it from whoever's on it. I've decided that you do not have it. It's not yours because God said I get it. Right? So we are dealing with the original form of manifest destiny that has been perpetuated for 3,000 years. The state of Israel is trying to protect itself against something that it tried to kill over and over and over and over again, then wasn't able to kill. So now they have to protect themselves against it. They created the issue. The state of Israel has been attacking Palestine. The state of Israel has forced Palestine into the space that Palestine is in currently. The state of Israel is attacking their children. The state of Israel will not let Palestinians leave the space. The state of Israel will not. Hamas is from the 90s. This problem has been around since 48, Miles. So tell me how Hamas from the 90s created something that's been around since 48. And also, is the issue don't kill me? Is that what the issue is? Don't kill me. Please don't genocide my people. Is that what the issue is to you? Please don't genocide my people. Please don't genocide my people. That's an issue, right? That's an issue to you. Please don't genocide my people is an issue to you. Please don't kill everybody is an issue to you. This is the issue that Hamas created. Please don't genocide my people. That's the issue. That's weird. I cheered on 9/11. I'm a war vet. The United States is not an okay nation. We are a fucked up space. Our government is a fucked up space. We're saving everybody, and yet we don't go in when people need help. We wait until there's income for us. We're not saving anybody. Israel documents their colonization of the Palestinians. They document their brutal colonization of the Palestinians. So, if Israel documents their brutal colonization of the Palestinians, Israel themselves states that the Palestinians are indigenous and they are not, that they are the colonizers and that it is not their land. Again, we get back to manifest destiny. This is manifest destiny. This is my God said, I get this space. And because my God said, I get this space, I can take this space, right? I can't cheer when innocent lives are lost. Can you cheer when Israel kills children? Are you talking 9/11? Do you view the people that are oppressing you as innocents? Any of them? If people are killing you, do you think that they're innocent? You need to understand what the United States government has done to understand why 9/11 was cheered, right? You need to understand the trauma that the United States government placed upon the Palestinians. The United States government is part of the reason that Palestine is in basically internment camps, right? The United States government did this. The United States government helped place Israel, the state of Israel, over the Palestinians. The United States government has given Israel weapons the entire time, has supported Israel's destruction of the Palestinians, has supported as Israel annexed more and 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 more land until the Palestinians were left with just little strips of land a couple miles long. The United States did all of that, right? And it's not even turned a blind eye. The United States helped. To this day, the United States will not acknowledge the Palestinians. To this day, the United States does not acknowledge the Palestinians exist. To this day, the United States government does not think that there is a Palestinian government. They will not acknowledge the Palestinians have a country. They will not acknowledge the Palestinians have rights. To this day. I've answered like 4 of your questions, Miles. What's your fucking problem? Did I miss one, honey pie? Are you all up in your ass because I missed a question? Do you think I'm here just for your questions? So the United States government is the problem for Palestine. They're a huge part of the problem for Palestine, right? And I did state that actually, as Mia just stated, I did state that I'm not going to deal with the troll stuff because I'm trying to make sure that we can stay going, right? Because the minute that I respond to the trolls the way the trolls want me to respond, we end up screwed up, right? And I'm trying not to do that. It's called self-control. It's something I'm really not that great at, I'll admit, but I'm really working on it, right? Nobody's talking about Africa, so I don't know why we're asking how they're indigenous. It is not right for people to unalive another because of their religious beliefs. Not at all. Israel's been unaliving the Palestinians because of their religious beliefs. So if Palestine rises up against that, is it Palestine that's the problem, or is it Israel who's been doing it? How do I define indigeneity? I define indigeneity the same way that the UN defines indigeneity. Indigenous peoples that are currently active are indigenous peoples who have maintained their culture through thousands of years. So the people who are originally in that land, who have maintained that culture within that land. The United States and are still actively celebrating that culture, still actively living that culture within that land, right? And native, defined by the UN, is people who may have been in that land for the same length of time, but they are the controlling government within that land. So if you look at Sweden, you see that the indigenous people of Sweden are the Sami, and the native people of Sweden are the Swedish. They both arrived in that area at roughly the same time period, yet one has overthrown the government of the other and put their government in place. So it is the native people of Sweden who have overthrown the indigenous people of Sweden and put the government of the native people in Sweden within its place, right? So I define indigenous the way the UN defines indigenous is a group of people who have occupied a space and maintained their ancestral connection and their ancestral actions, their ancestral culture, right? No, Palestine is not Germany in the 40s and 30s. Um, Palestine is maybe the Judaic people in the 40s and 30s, right? Except for the Judaic people weren't in their indigenous homeland in the 40s and 30s, right? Lunar, I would state that the same way that and other indigenous people fit. Detribalized indigenous people within Turtle Island are absolutely indigenous people. They're still maintaining it. If you talk to many people who are detribalized from south of the United States Mexican border, they carry on many customs that they have been utilizing for thousands and thousands of years. A lot of the language is brought into Mexican Spanish. There's a lot of different ways that they've been able to carry that on, right? Miles, you are asking a lot of questions and not listening to any of them. So we are no longer answering your questions, just so you're aware, okay? Because you are just asking questions and not listening to any of the answers, right? I think Islam is better than Christianity any day of the week. Um, I think that they're all worshiping the same God and they're all using the same book, but they're all fighting over who gets the right to worship him and who states the right way of doing it. And the only reason that Palestinians worship that God is because of the fact that the Judaic people or the state of Israel, not the Judaic people, but the state of Israel conquered the Canaanites and forced them to worship their God. And eventually, just like that was translated into Christianity, it was translated into Islam. It is the same God, and they only worship that God because they were forced to worship that God, right? So the Palestinian people, the Judaic people, there were some Judaic people. That's not their homeland, though, right? So the problem is and this is something that is problematic for the Judaic, not problematic for the Judaic people, but is something that needs to be acknowledged. The Judaic people don't actually have a homeland, right? That's like the formation of being Judaic, right? Is that they don't actually have a homeland, right? Um, Manifest Destiny told them that God was going to guide them to their land that He was giving them, right? And when God guided them to their land that he was giving them, he guided them to an occupied territory. and helped them kill off the people in that occupied territory as much as they could, right? So it's not actually their homeland. They are the colonizers of that land, right? Exile, there's a couple of different ways for it. Like there's a couple of different things for it and a couple of different ways that it's been stated, right? Um, See, and I thought that the 40 years of wandering was the exile, right? Um, but the land of Canaan is where God landed them as their land of milk and honey, right? So uh, the Canaanites didn't kill anybody to get that land first. Now, that land has been occupied since the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens moved in that land 150,000 years ago, right? All evidence and all DNA evidence shows that the people that have occupied that land, the direct descendants of the people that have occupied that land for thousands of years are the Palestinians and the Lebanese, right? I'm not saying that Israel needs to go anywhere. I'm saying that maybe Israel stays in Israel and stops taking outside areas, stops trying to take other space. So again, let's go over how this started, right? How they got this. So in the 40s, after the end of World War II, there is this push to return the Judaic people to having their own state, the state of Israel, right? This push comes from the United States and from Britain. Britain is in control, has basically this guardian ad litem of Palestine at the time. And so they decide that they're going to give part of Palestine to the Judaic people to form the state of Israel. So as the state of Israel is forming, we see that the UN is given the control, right, of how to divide an already occupied land and return the colonizers of that land to the already occupied land. We see that they set up a map and they give the state of Israel certain areas and they give the state of Palestine certain areas. And as they're setting up this map, Palestine says, if you do this like this, and the way that you're doing it, you're setting it up to where they're going to take this from us. They're going to screw us over. So we won't agree to this division of the map, because if you do this division of the map, they're going to use this division of the map as a way to actually attack the other areas and to steal our land and to take control. Literally, Palestine stays this. Now, Israel wants the land like it is because that's their plan, right? So Israel, without the UN deciding that this is what they're allowed to have, and with the backing of the United States government, goes in and takes this land. This results in a war that lasts for a few years. It's considered the war between the state of Israel and the 6 Arab nations. And at the end of this war, Israel has taken roughly the area that the UN decided that they were going to give them. That area, again, is the area that Palestine said, please don't give this to them, because if you give this to them, you're going to end up setting it up for them to take more land and to harm us. So in 48, this war ends, and the state of Israel is in control over these 2 areas. By, I think it's in the 50s, they're already pushing this area out. They don't really even give it any time before they're already deciding that they're going to take more land, just like the Palestinians had warned the UN. And over the course of the next 48 to 67, they are continuously taking up all land. The only land that they don't take during this time is the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And that is because these 2 spaces are controlled by other countries at the time, right? Palestine was a country before that, and Palestine isn't currently considered a country. There are some nations who recognize Palestine as a country, but Palestine is not currently considered a country, not by the US even. So by 67, Israel has eaten up everywhere else in this space, right? They've even tried to conquer Lebanon at least once by then. because Israel, the state, has decided that they're going to take back their holy land because God gave that to them, manifest destiny at its first and finest, right? Really? So what did Palestine have to do before Hamas was there? Because Hamas is only in the 90s, and Israel has conquered these spaces in 67 and forced the indigenous people of these spaces into essentially being refugees in their own land in 67. That is what, 67, 77, 87, 23 years prior to Palestine or to Hamas coming onto the scene, right? Right? So we see that good for them. I would vote in anybody who would overthrow my oppressor. Wouldn't you? If your children are being murdered in the streets, wouldn't you vote in who you needed to stop your children from being murdered in the streets? Right? So you're looking at a state that in 67, Israel conquered again. And because they haven't been able to fully kill all the Palestinians in that space, they have moved their own people into that space. But because they haven't killed all of the people in that space, they're still waging war against that space. They actually took Gaza from Egypt. It was Egyptian at that time, right? And they stole it from the Egyptians, right? So that they could conquer it again, right? Since 67, the Palestinians have been living in that area under the control of the Israeli government, being constantly attacked and constantly bombed and constantly, no, Sean, and constantly harmed. And any group that has risen up to overthrow this oppressor gets labeled as a terrorist by you. Any group who is rising up saying, don't kill my children, you're labeling as an oppressor or as a terrorist. You're saying that those who are out there saying, don't kill my children are terrorists. You're saying that those who, if Egypt didn't want the Palestinians in their country, if they didn't want the Gaza Strip, they wouldn't have kept the Gaza Strip, and Israel wouldn't have had to go to war against Egypt to steal the Gaza Strip. I mean, like, so are you military trained if you're like growing up in a war zone, or are you just knowing how to fight because you've had to maintain your aliveness? Right. Yes, there is plenty of archaeological evidence of the colonization of Canaan by the state of Israel. Plenty of archaeological evidence. Sean, Israel is deliberately targeting civilians, women and children. The state of Israel has been deliberately targeting women and children for decades. They did steal it. Modern day Canaan is absolutely, the descendants of Canaan are absolutely the Palestinian and the Lebanese people. I'm teaching you history because you obviously don't know it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and turn it back to where we need it so that we're not dealing with it. So again, we're looking at a space that the colonization of was documented by the people who colonized it. And the people who colonized it documented a brutal colonization. They have documented a brutal colonization. They documented raping women. They documented killing children. And they documented doing this because their God told them to. This is the original manifest destiny. God says it's even the same God. Okay. God says this is our space, and so therefore we can take it. And if we have to kill you all to get it, that's because God said it was okay to. God said it was okay to kill you. God said this is our land and you shouldn't be in it, and you're not doing the things that God wants you to do anyway, so we're going to kill you. So then the Judaic people, at this point they are considered the Judaic people, but we really want to stick with the fact that we are looking at the state of Israel as opposed to Judaism. So then the state of Israel decides to form their government and keep their government in control over the people of this land, right? This is, again, colonization. They are doing this using manifest destiny. Their God told them they could. They document the division of this land in the book of Joshua. The general Joshua documents how he actually divided this land and the governments between the tribes of Israel. They document the rape and pillage of this land. They document it all as God told them to, right? They document how God told them to. They document how God helps them to do this, right? And when they are done taking this land and imposing their government on this land, we see that there's probably a few hundred years of this control of their government before other places come in and take this control, right? We do know that the state of Israel gets driven out of that area a couple of times, right? Again, recognizing that the state of Israel being driven out of that area by other people, not by the Palestinians, not by the Canaanites, who are the ancestors of the Palestinians, right? We see that it is through the conquering, the colonization of this land, that the Canaanites are introduced to the God that they currently worship, right? We see that it is through the documentation of the colonization of this land that the Canaanites are removed from control in their homeland, that as Indigenous people, they have to fight to maintain their Indigenous thought processes and structure through thousands of years of colonization. We see that the Israeli people, for the most part, have moved out of this area. The government of this area is no longer Israeli. The government of this area is returned to the Indigenous people of this area, the descendants of the Canaanites, right? And that after World War II, when Britain has basically a guardian ad litem over the Palestinians, because, ain't nothing like the Western world deciding to tell who people could. Britain and the United States like to infantilize everybody else and decide that they need to control everybody else because they can't control themselves as well as Britain and the United States thinks they should, or don't do it in the way that Britain and the United States thinks they should, right? So in their infantilization of the Palestinians, we see that Britain and the United States, Britain takes control over Palestine, takes control over the entire area. When World War II has ended and Britain has control over this entire area, Britain and the United States decide to help form the state of Israel and return the Israelites in the state of Israel to Judea, to Jerusalem. They go to the UN and ask the UN how to divide this land and ask the UN to divide this land. When the UN divides this land up, we see that the UN gives area to the Judaic people in a way, because what they do is they give them this area and then this area, leaving little strips here and little strips here and little strips here, which makes it easy for the Judaic or for the state of Israel to therefore conquer these areas again, to therefore colonize these areas again. They did it 3,000 years ago. Here's them doing it again. So we see that Palenstine tells the UN at the time, please don't do it like this. If you do it like this, if you do it in this specific way, they're going to take over the entire area. They're going to attack us. They're going to take our space. And the UN doesn't go back and start redrawing. Maybe they don't have time. I don't know why they don't redraw it. It might be a lack of time, because almost immediately, when Palenstine has not agreed to this, Israel, the state of, with the backing of the United States, goes in and starts conquering this area. They fight what is called at the time the 6 Arab nations. Okay. And in fighting the 6 Arab nations, they take roughly the original land, or the land that the UN originally stated, right? The map out that the UN originally stated. The United States helps them get that, to the objection of the Palestinian people, the indigenous groups, the descendants of the Canaanites who are still in this area. When you see that they take this further after the end of this. So this sets the state of Israel as being set in 1948. After they set the state of Israel as being set in 1948, you see that the state of Israel immediately starts conquering area around them. The state of Israel continuously is conquering area around the state of Israel. The state of Israel was not initially what it is today. Okay. The state of Israel is given or as outlined by the UN, right, is not what it is today. The state of Israel starts conquering everywhere. They try to take over Lebanon a couple of times. They're still trying to take over Lebanon. Okay. And after they conquer pretty much every other area, they conquer the last two areas. One of these areas at this time is owned by Egypt. It is still Palestinian. They are owned by a foreign government because that's what colonization does, right? So the Gaza Strip is an area that at this time is owned by Egypt. They are the foreign or colonizing government controlling the Gaza Strip. The state of Israel takes this from Egypt, right? Not that Egypt gave it up. Egypt does not give it up. It is taken by the state of Israel. So the state of Israel's last two places within this area that they have conquered, and since then they have tried to take Lebanon a couple of times, so it's not like they're done trying to take more space, okay? The last two places that they try to take and that they come pretty damn close to, but they're still fighting over them today because they couldn't completely, are the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So within these two spaces, we have the last refugees, the last remaining of the Palestinian people who are trying to maintain their autonomy, maintain their sovereignty over an indigenous nation that has been their indigenous nation for thousands and thousands of years. There are indigenous groups that are trying to be recognized by the UN who fit all of the guidelines of what the UN considers indigenous, but of course the UN is not going to acknowledge that maybe they shouldn't have done this and maybe this is a fuck up. There are 4 indigenous groups within Gaza and the West Bank who are fighting to be seen as indigenous groups and who are fighting to maintain their indigenous sovereignty over land that has been stolen from them and land that is currently under foreign occupation by a foreign government. The Gaza Strip especially is a 2-mile or 2 square mile, 3 square mile space that hosts over 2 million Palestinians within this space who are struggling, living as refugees within a space that is their indigenous homeland and has been their indigenous homeland since before the original state of Israel documents its manifest destiny-based colonization of this space. So we have 2 million Palestinians living as refugees on their own homeland in what is effectively, you can call it a concentration camp, you can call it a reservation, you can call it a detainment area, you can call it an open air prison. It fits all of these things. It is a space that is routinely attacked, routinely bombed, routinely assaulted by the Israeli government. And in the routine attack, routine assault of the Israeli government in this space, we see that children die, that women die. There is a constant attack within this space by the Israeli government. Again, a foreign government and a space that is occupied by indigenous people who are currently living without everything. Israel controls their water rights. Israel controls their food access. Israel won't even let them escape. And this is because Israel is fully aware that just like they left and came back to conquer again, that they, like any colonizing government, there is an understanding that if you leave those you colonized alive, eventually they will overthrow you. Eventually they will take back their space because you have colonized them. You have been in a complete and utter ass. You fucked up. You were a shitty human being. So Israel does not want the Palestinians to get out because then they can come back, right? If they can get out of that space, they can come back. So they block all access to getting out, and they have. There are places who will take Palestinian refugees nearby. You can try and get to Egypt. You can try and escape over the water. All of these spaces are blocked by the Israeli government. The out through Egypt gets routinely attacked by the Israeli government. And it is the only other country that there's an out to, because other than that, it is surrounded by Israel, right, and water. All of the methods of leaving are routinely attacked and are blocked, right? So we are not looking at, I just want this land. We are looking at, I want to eradicate the people in this land. Okay. And as we watch, we see that since 67, which is when the Gaza Strip and the West Bank were taken, right? That these people within the communities within these spaces, the Palestinians within these spaces, have been living under traumatic occupation. We are talking again, routinely bombed. We are talking again, people are routinely being murdered in these spaces by the state of Israel. Women and children are routinely being attacked. Schools are routinely being attacked. Hospitals are routinely being attacked. All the things that we would dictate as being crimes against humanity are being perpetuated by the Israeli state, but because of white guilt, because of America and Britain's guilt over what happened to the Judaic people by the Germans, we see that it's allowed. We don't talk about it. We don't care about it. Israel is allowed to commit atrocities against Palestine because we are guilty of allowing Germany to commit atrocities against Israel. And in the United States and Britain's government's desire to make up for the wrongs that they did by not going into Germany sooner, by not stopping this sooner, right? Because we never do. We never, ever, ever, ever do, right? I remind you of Rwanda. We waited, right? We always wait because of the United States and Britain's government's guilt over what happened to the Judaic people. They have allowed the state of Israel to commit atrocities against the Palestinians. And these are atrocities. They're legitimate atrocities, right? And then they release information that there's terrorist groups within the Palestinians. I want you to put yourself outside of your shoes for just a second, okay? Whatever country that you consider yourself to be a member of, whether you're from the United States, Canada, Mexico, whether you're from England, whatever country that you yourself are a part of, I want you to picture for a second that a foreign government attacks your country. That foreign government attacks your country. It kills as many possible people as they can. And in killing as many people as they possibly can, they round the remaining people up and put them in specific spaces. Then they commit atrocities against the people in those specific spaces. And this goes on for decades. What do? As your children die, as your parents are killed, as your nieces and nephews die, what do? Do you just sit back and take it? Oh, well, they conquered us. They can have us now. Doesn't matter that they're killing us. Really bad that my child died yesterday. What do? Do you just sit and take it? Is that what you do? Why do you think that anybody should? It is not a terrorist group when it is fighting against foreign occupation in its own land. You are not a terrorist group if you are fighting against your colonizers. That's not terrorism. That's rebellion. That's not terrorism. That is revolt. That's not terrorism. That is refusing to be oppressed by a foreign government occupying your land. That is not terrorism. So while I don't support all the things that Hamas is doing, they are not a terrorist group. They might be a religious extremist group, but they are not a terrorist group. They are a group that is trying to overthrow a foreign government in their land. And that is not terrorism. That is rebellion. That is revolt. That is trying to get your land back. That is trying to stop the atrocities. How many children do you have to watch die around you before you rise up and say enough is enough? How many schools are bombed before you say that's not okay? How many women are assaulted by soldiers before you say that's not okay anymore? How many children do you watch starve? How many people trying to escape who are murdered? At what point do you protect and defend your people? At what point do you decide that enough is enough and atrocity will not happen to another one of your children? It is not terrorism to try and save your community. It is not terrorism to try and overthrow your oppressors. It is, in fact, your oppressors who are the terrorists. It is, in fact, again, your oppressors who are the terrorists. We are looking at the original manifest destiny that is still playing out. We are looking at a manifest destiny documented by the colonizers who perpetuated it in their book. It is that documentation of the conquering of the land of Canaan that was actually used to create the doctrine of manifest destiny that was used against Africa and the Turtle Island Indigenous people and South American or Abayalian Indigenous people, right? It is manifest destiny as outlined by the conquering of the land of milk and honey, the holy land given by God, outlined in the Bible, that was used to justify manifest destiny that took Africa, that took Turtle Island, and that took Abigail. It is what the state of Israel did to the Canaanites, who are the ancestors of the Palestinian people, that was used to create manifest destiny that put Turtle Island Indigenous people through a genocide, saw African people stolen from their home. It is the same manifest destiny, and it is that outline that was utilized. So we are dealing with the original manifest destiny. We are dealing with colonization and atrocity in the name of God. Now, I don't hold with religious extremism. I don't hold with that God. But to be angry at the Palestinians for following a God that was forced upon them by the state of Israel is ridiculous. The Palestinians currently follow a God that they would not have followed if the state of Israel had not forced it upon them. Now, they don't follow the book the state of Israel follows. This is correct. They do follow several passages and several books from that book. Both the Quran and the Bible have the Old Testament, which is the Torah, right? They have extra books to them, right? But both the Quran and the Bible have the original book of this God within them, right? So anybody who follows the Quran is following the Torah. Anybody who follows the Bible is following, well, the Bible has been translated way more times than the Torah or than the Quran has ever been translated. The Quran is usually written in its original languages. And so the lack of translation means that it is definitely a more direct version of the Torah than we find in the Bible, because the Bible, having been translated so many times, the version of the Torah that we find in the Bible is not the original version of the Torah. Okay, so we are talking about people who follow the book and the God of the state of Israel because it was forced upon them, not because it was theirs, but because their colonizers forced them to. And because their colonizers forced them to, can you really be pissed at them for A, saying enough is enough, stop harming my people, and B, following the God that they were told to follow? Right? And let's be real. Israel says, follow this God, right? The state of Israel at this time, when we're looking at the conquering, right, as they're putting their government and therefore their God's word in place over all of these other people, they are telling people to follow this God's word, but they're stating that you can never be chosen by this God because we are the chosen people and God only chooses us. And they're stating that you can never be a citizen because you're not chosen by this God, right? So following this God's word in a different iteration, right, in a different manner is only natural. When you have a God forced upon you, being told that you really can't follow this God. I mean, you have to follow all of his rules, but you can't follow him. And, or you can't follow, you're not a member of our nation and you'll never be his chosen, right? So are you really going to be pissed off at people for following a God that was forced upon them? Are you really going to be pissed off at a people for trying to overthrow their oppressors? You cannot be angry that people are enough is enough. You can't. You can. I mean, you get to feel whatever the fuck you want to feel, right? The thing is it's morally inept of you to be angry that if people are saying, stop killing me. I mean, it's kind of an American thing to do. I'm not going to front. It is kind of an American thing to do, to get pissed off at people for saying enough is enough. I'm not going to let you kill my children, because America does like to kill children, right? It's kind of our top-notch thing to do, right? So it is kind of an American thing, but it is extremely morally inept to decide that you're going to be pissed off at people who are saying, stop killing my children. Palestinians are the descendants of the Canaanites, who the state of Israel documents colonizing and documents trying to commit genocide against. They document the atrocities that they're doing, and they document them as if they're doing the right thing because their God told them it's okay to, right? Their God told them that this was their holy land, and it didn't matter that there were already people in it. It's okay, just kill those people, because that's what their God kind of does anyways, right? Let's face it. It's a lot of, it's okay, you can kill people that they don't believe, they don't believe in me, you can kill them. There's a lot of that, right? So we are talking again about an indigenous group of people who have been fighting a documented colonization against the same people, or by the same people, for thousands of years. In its current iteration, it has been helped by foreign governments who have backed up the colonization by another foreign government. Sounds about like white, don't it? Like, let's be real. Okay. I am going to go in like 5 minutes. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and turn comments on for the last 5 minutes so that people who want to can speak. I am going to, in that last 5 minutes, remind everybody that biologically we are nurturing and communal. Biologically, we are innately nurturing and communal. These are things that we need for species survival. And because biologically we are nurturing communal, and we live in a time and a space where nurturing and communal is being taught as evil, right? Oh, I'm so sorry, Obsidian. It is on the YouTube, so you can go over there and comment because I hate not being able to allow people to comment. Let me. Um, Maybe if I start a new goal, it will do it. So I think if you click where it says 20, 31, 20 out of 31 up there, it'll let you subscribe that way. Oh, and the orange heart does apparently. I don't usually. I don't know the Lamb for Peace deal that was made with Israel. I am not. I don't deal with my government except to try and overthrow my government. Just stating, as a war vet, I work to overthrow my government because of how wrong it is. And I don't know everything, and this is not my typical subject. My typical subject is anthropology and archaeology, right? I do know a lot of history, a lot of documented history. History is about the written word, right? So I typically teach prior. Yeah, I know she is. Well, that's their chair. I typically teach prior. I typically teach prior to like 30,000 years ago is typically what our content and my content is and what I discuss. This is something that actually I'm discussing today because I have Indigenous relatives who I've had to watch really, go pro Israel. And I had to kind of explain on Facebook to a few of the older relatives, hey, this is another example or an early example of what's happened to us, and so I felt that it was important to get on here and share this information, right? Only because I know that, especially here in the United States, there is a lot of misinformation on it. Again, the United States doesn't even acknowledge Palestine as a country. The United States doesn't even acknowledge that Palestine is a country, right? Yes, and like I put on the background, the state of Israel is not the Judaic people, and I do not want anybody to walk out of here thinking that I am talking about Judaic people. Uh, that is not what we're talking about. There are Judaic people across the globe who have absolutely no support for the state of Israel, who would not support the state of Israel. The state of Israel is in and of itself a government and a state. They are not the Judaic people. This is an entirely different thing, right? And that is something that absolutely needs to be constantly, constantly, constantly reiterated, right? The state of Israel and the Judaic people are two very, 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 very different entities, right? The state of Israel does not, they'd like to, but they don't go across the globe. And Judaic people are everywhere. You can be an American citizen and be Judaic, and you have nothing to do with the state of Israel except for the fact that the American government is helping the state of Israel, right? So, and I probably know more of Islam than I do of any other religion, as in, Bible based or religion to me is something that's based on a book, right? I know the state of Israel more than I know all the other ones, only because, or not the state of Israel, sorry. I know Islam more than I know all the other ones just because of the fact that I was raised within an Islamic community for a few years. When I was a child, my parents were Islam. So I do know more about Islamic faith than I do about the other faiths. I have read through the Bible. I do try and make sure that I know the points that I'm arguing, right? But I find the Bible to be just a book of hate, and so it's very hard for me. And then, uh, I mean, when I was a child, I read the Torah in Hebrew because in Islam, the Torah is written in Hebrew, and you read the Torah in Hebrew in Islam, right? So I have read the Torah in Hebrew, but I was 7 and I couldn't tell you a goddamn thing it said anymore, right? I just couldn't because, like, I'm 45, right? It's been 30 something odd years. I could not tell you a dang thing that the Torah said in Hebrew, right? But I did read the Torah in Hebrew as a child, and I do know that the Torah in Hebrew is seen within Islam, but it is not. I'm reading Resolution 242. This is actually pretty decent. Unfortunately, I mean, it's not something that's been like actually enacted, right? Like, so the resolution 242 from 1967, the Security Council is expressing its continued concern with the gravitas of the situation in the Middle East, the grave situation in the Middle East, emphasizing the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war and the need to work for a just and lasting peace in which every state in the area can live in security, emphasizing further that all member states in their acceptance of the Charter of the United Nations have undertaken a commitment to act in accordance with the Article 2 of the Charter. So the United Nations won't let Palestine join the United Nations. They're kind of considered a nominal member. Israel refuses to join the United Nations. So anything that is dictated by the United Nations, Israel doesn't have to follow. It affirms that the fulfillment of charter principles requires the establishment of a just and lasting peace in the Middle East, which should include the application of both the following principles: withdrawal of Israel armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict. That would be the Gaza Strip. In 1967 would be the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Termination of all claims or states of belligerency and respect for and acknowledgement of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of every state in the area and the right to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries free from threats or acts of force. So this is very much, the Israelites are not indigenous. The Palestinians are the descendants of the Canaanites. The Israelites conquered the Canaanites. The Israelites document in their own books how they colonized Canaan. And the Palestinians are the descendants of the Canaanites. Therefore, the Palestinians are the indigenous people, right? And the state, or the Israelite state, is not the indigenous people of that area. They are not indigenous to that area, even in their, no, not nice try, like actual like DNA evidence supports this. And the Israelites state it. Like in their Bible, they state this. This is their documentation. This comes from their documentation, right? Their documentation shows that they're not the indigenous people of this area and that they actually like overthrew the indigenous people of the area and colonized that area, and that they committed atrocities against the indigenous people of that area. That's what their Bible states. Like that's from their Bible. That's from their book, right? Okay, yes. It is called the Torah. Can you read it in Hebrew? Like I said, last time I read it in Hebrew, I was 7, and it's been a long friggin' time, right? Conquer doesn't mean what you think it means. Germany conquered France, yet we threw them out, right? We're not a superpower. You just think we are. The only thing we're number 1 in is maternal mortality rates and level of incarcerated people. The United States is a bully and is fucked up. As a war vet, I can say that with every ounce of me. I can say that the United States is a bully and fucked up. So they're not a native to the Arabian Peninsula. And actually the Palestinians are descendants of the Canaanites, so they are indigenous to that area. I can be wrong, but I still have the right to state it. I mean, you can state I'm wrong, but I'm still right. The US is a fucking bully. And if you don't know it, it's because you're probably white, conservative, and Southern. Just because this is my country before it was your country. This is my space before it was your space. Just because you colonized a space that my people were in for 50 fucking thousand years doesn't mean it's your space and you can go back where you fucking came from, because it isn't from here and I came from here. Just saying. The minute I turn the comments on, it jumps, doesn't it? So I am going to go because I do need to get going and get to my appointment, right? But I want to reiterate again, as I was trying to, that you are nurturing and communal. But that is what humanity innately is nurturing and communal. We currently live in a society that tells us to be nurturing and communal is wrong, right? We currently live in a society that tells us that being nurturing and communal is something evil. right? Even though that is our natural state of being. We currently live in a society that tells you that you're innately evil when you are not. Because we are innately nurturing and communal and we're living in an extremely sick society, in an extremely harmful society, many of us are dealing with anxiety and depression because we are living in a society that is the antithesis to everything that we as a species needs for our continuation as a species. So it is natural and only healthy for you to have a healthy response to an ill society. So when you are dealing with depression and anxiety, it is a healthy response to an extremely sick society, okay, to an extremely ill society. So please know that you are not the problem. And it is only through recognizing, which is what happens when your healthy response to an unhealthy society happens, right? So through recognizing the unhealthy society that we live in, it is only those who recognize it who can change the society, who can change what is going on, right? So if you are one of those people who is dealing with a great deal of depression or anxiety because you live in a society that is extremely sick, you are one of those people who are necessary to the change of our society and the continuation of our species as a whole. So, dealing with that depression and anxiety, please, please, please understand that you are a necessary person. Do not leave us. We need you. Okay. You are a necessary person, especially when you are seeing what is fucked up in the world around you. When you see the sickness in this late stage capitalism that turns every single person around you into something to be exploited, an object to be exploited instead of a human being with its own thoughts and own rights, right? That is a healthy response to a sick society. And you are important and you are necessary. You are important and you are necessary. How do we change? How do we fix this? It's always a great question, right? It's always a great question. Land back globally. Land back globally. Land back is returning space to the tending and governance of the Indigenous people of those spaces. Land back globally ends the climate destruction caused by Western agriculture, monocrop agriculture, which is causing climate destruction. Land back globally ends the exploitative thought process that is harming all of us. And land back globally ensures the continuation of our species. So, how do we change this? Land back as a global scale is going to change it, right? The Judaic people, the state of Israel documents their colonization of Palestine. They are the colonizers in that space, and the Palestinians are the indigenous people in that space. And I'm going to leave you with that. And the reminder that you are necessary to change this atrocity that we are living in. So keep coming around, keep staying, keep being, keep waking up, keep helping others to wake up, because it is only through this that we can change this, that we can create a better society that will give us the ability to actually continue as a species, as we are currently trying to mass extinct our own species. We will be the only species in the history of this planet who has mass extincted itself. Land back on a global scale gives us the ability to reverse what we are doing to the planet and to each other. Land back means returning of tending and governance to the indigenous peoples in those spaces, right? Take care. Much love. Have a great one. Computer, stop. Have a great one, everybody. The Jewish people actually document themselves colonizing. They're not indigenous to that space. And their whole shtick is that they're not indigenous to any space, right? Bye. Oh, Delilah, I do not know if use this email. And that should be able to get you directly to me. Because I don't know if I have you on TikTok or not be able to respond like as a friend on TikTok. So if you use that email, you can directly message me. It's just a widow's word or a widow word, and you can use that. Yeah. a word, and you can use that to directly message me. Have a great one. Bye.